everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Podcast. I'm Sarah Sash.
And I'm Andrew Campbell. We're back here for another episode at the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa, where the Dairy Farmers of Canada are holding their annual policy conference. What a great building and what a great spot to be right in the heart of federal politics in Ottawa. Sarah?
Indeed, there is a lot to see, and you really get the sense of what's going on in Ottawa and the feel of it here. So it's just great to be back in person and participating with producers from across the country once again.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that came up today was obviously the environmental sustainability pillar, Sarah. This has been a conversation for, years, but obviously, pushing much harder, since net zero. What were some of the things coming in that you were hoping to find out?
Well, I think everyone's been really looking forward to the big reveal today of the Best Management Practices Guide to Mitigate Emissions on Dairy Farms. So I was pretty excited to finally see that thing, and we're going to talk about it.
We are. What a great segue, because we have two great guests who have been part of this process, and we're part of the panel today talking about what this Best Management Practice Guide to Mitigate Emissions on Dairy Farms looks like. We've got Fawn, we've got JP. That's what's next on the Canadian Podcast. Our two guests today joining us on the Canadian Podcast include Fawn Jackson. Fawn is with the Dairy Farmers of Canada and joined last year as Chief Sustainability Officer. We've also got JP Brower. JP is a dairy farmer from Alberta, was involved in the group of farmers consulting on this project. Fawn, JP, thanks very much for joining the podcast today.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
JP, maybe we can actually start with you as the farmer on the panel today. Tell us a little bit about your farm.
Yeah, we're located in central Alberta. It's a partnership farm. I farm with a total of 3 brothers. I'm one of the brothers, and my parents. We milk 375 cows, and I think the partnership's really healthy because it allows me to engage with industry in other areas, like I am here in Ottawa today, and the farm is still running, so that's really nice. Other than that, we've been involved with fairly innovative practices, I think largely due to proximity to some of the research universities and their desire to, and our, I guess, inability to say no to their desire to have projects on our farm. Yeah.
And is that basically, those innovative products? Like what really draws you to this environmental component and this drive to net zero?
Yeah. Actually, I see the initiative as a whole benefiting dairy farmers beyond just the greenhouse net zero goal. I think that every single practice that I have looked at in the best management practices proposal, which is entirely voluntary, I don't know why they wouldn't get serious consideration. Each of them. Some of us aren't going to do all of them. I mentioned today that I'm not that interested in doing grazing. It doesn't really fit the Alberta climate that well. It doesn't fit our management style that well. I guess I won't say never, but it's highly unlikely.
So I'm just going to jump back a little bit here and make sure that our listeners can tell that Fawn's with us. So Fawn, you've been with DFC for about a year. Can you tell us a bit about your role there? And then we'll jump into this content that JP's talking about.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at DFC, and there's 3 main parts to the role, or 3 main teams that I get to work with. There is the research team, there is the sustainability team, which worked on this, and then there's the proaction and on-farm production team, which does everything from traceability to the code to animal health and proaction. So that's what I get to do at DFC.
Big launch today, Fawn.
Exciting day. Yes.
It's a big day because here, as we said, we're at the annual policy conference for DFC, and hot off the presses, it's still warm, is this Best Management Practices Guide to Mitigate Emissions on Dairy Farms. Now, I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak at a few different meetings over kind of, since you started with Chief Sustainability Officer. They really kind of threw you into the deep end, going to all of these meetings to talk about this environmental component. And this is one of the things that you talked about was coming. Can you talk a little bit about, how you've come to this and what is in this guide?
Yeah, I would say at all of those meetings, the thing that you always hear from our producers is, yes, we care very much about the environment. Yes, we're glad that we're being leaders. Now, can you tell me what you actually want me to do? And so that's what this guide really does, is it offers 30 best management practices that all contribute to reducing greenhouse gases, but as JP mentioned, also often have many other benefits, whether it's to biodiversity or water or production efficiency, these sorts of things. And so 30 options of people that people can take a look at and say, yep, that would be a really great fit for my farm. You have the ability to click on some additional resources. You have some farmer testimonials. And I guess the key part that I would say is this is just the start, right? Like this is putting it down, putting it out there. Here's the options today. And now we need to get this information even further into farmers' hands. So look out in the future for webinars, for perhaps, some peer-to-peer learning opportunities, for, opportunities to connect with researchers, because we're really just getting started on this and we're really excited to see where it's going to go. I also wanted to mention that JP did say these are voluntary. And so some of the BMPs are going to be an awesome fit for your operation. Some of the BMPs you're already doing. Many of the BMPs you're already going to be doing in some capacity, and some aren't going to be a fit, and that's completely okay. And we actually really appreciate that feedback too, because I always say that once you tell a farmer a goal, they're going to figure out how to do it. And if you can let us know what the obstacles are in your way, we'd be more than happy to get them out of the way for you to do that practice on your farm. So I really appreciate the feedback that we get from the farmer community.
So when we talk about a goal, there's this goal out there of net zero by 2050. And I'll throw it to JP first, just from a producer perspective, and then maybe you could weigh in as well. But why net zero? What is it that, we know the federal government's talking about it, processors are talking about it. For you as a producer and you as someone working in the industry, why net zero and why should we do this now?
Yeah, the concern is that dairy farmers as an industry are having a harmful impact on the environment, at least in some areas, and greenhouse gas emissions is something that is talked about globally as a concern for everyone, and the public has indicated that they don't like that side of the dairy industry, and I think we have an opportunity here to say that we have environmental impacts that we can make less harmful, we can improve on. I think it's being very open with the public and saying, yeah, we can work on things, we can improve. And this initiative allows practices to be put into place that don't just improve greenhouse gas emissions, but are appealing to farmers to implement that impact other areas of environment and economically.
Yeah, completely agree. Consumers care about this, so they're buying our products, so we better care about it too. And handily enough, we do care about it, right? So I think there's this really lovely merging of priorities. But there's other reasons for us to be doing this, of course, beyond the consumer. Much of our supply chain has also made similar commitments. And we want to make sure that we find opportunities in these commitments. So this really does become an opportunity for the dairy sector and not something that becomes, this really heavy cost to us because we tackle it too late or because, we don't want to talk about it at all. And well, too bad, maybe our financial institutions are saying, hey, no, you have to give us some information on this. So, I would say there's that sort of getting ahead of what's coming around the corner as well. But I would also go back to the point that JP made at the start is, every single one of these BMPs is also hopefully very closely tied to economic well-being. And so we're not, doing this solely out of the kindness of our hearts, but also for the goodness of, our bottom lines. And so I always say that if we're putting forward BMPs that don't make economic sense, that's a signal to our team, to the researchers, to the policy community that we have to go back and figure out how to make economic sense, because these are businesses, and we do business, and we have to do that, and we also have to take care of the environment. So when we can find spots that overlap, that's where really the sweet spot is.
And just to jump back in myself, I'm sounding like I've bought in hook, line, and sinker, and I think by and large I have, but that doesn't mean I didn't have my reservations to start with. I was very concerned about what's going on, how mandatory is this, am I going to like anything that comes out of it? But you guys have set it up as a real win-win.
Great.
Yeah, and certainly, when you look through this guide that is available from the DFC website, it is. The nice thing that within the chart, it actually shows here's the percentage of producers that are already doing these things. And out of the 30, I think there's only one that doesn't have at least like 20%, if not up to 50% of producers already doing. So it's not new territory. JP, you mentioned off the bat that, grazing might not be one of the things that you'd be interested in doing. What are some of the things you are interested in doing out of this book? Or already doing?
Yeah, I'll speak to maybe what farmers in general, and we on our farm for sure are already doing, and that's producing milk more efficiently. Like, we're aiming for higher producing cows. We're aiming for feed efficiency itself. We see that now in our breeding selection as a criteria we can target. That impacts us as impacting GHG. I heard a bit of a story that some producers were saying, I'm not going to do this. Well, you already are doing some of these things. You want to make more money at the end of the day, and some of the things that make you more money at the end of the day are going to cause you to engage with these activities. One of the maybe more unique ones that we're engaged with is, and I think everyone could look into it a bit more, is emptying your lagoon more frequently. We see the nitrogen volatilization, nitrogen is gassing off. We want to capture it, so we try to put it on the land a bit more often. Yeah, there's a cost, but there's a cost of spreading manure anyways. So those kinds of things, if you start to dig into what's proposed, and really read it, you might say, oh, hey, why haven't I considered that? And that's what I'm hoping farmers will do.
So if you don't have a copy yet, which you will have in your inbox or on the website, like we say, you don't have to have the hard copy to do this. Fawn, can you cover what the actual segments are of the best management practices? You've divided them into categories, and we've talked a bit about the different beneficial management practices, but can you just fill us in on the categories before we continue on?
Yeah, sure. And maybe I can even give you an example in each one. So we have livestock management, and one of the BMPs in there is improving feed efficiency. We have feed production as the second category, and incorporating perennials is an option in there. Of course, there's many in each category, but I'll give you sort of one in each one. We have manure management, and in there we have as an option in-vessel manure composting. The fourth is energy infrastructure and transportation. And in there, as an example, we have converting to alternatively powered machinery, which maybe that's a few years down the road, but I think sort of tweaks the interest of some farmers that I've spoken to. Land management, we have in there, for example, protecting riparian buffer zones. So lots of options underneath each one of those categories.
And then also in that guide, earlier on, and you showed it in your presentation today, was the graph that says, here's what our emissions are at today. Here's, with a few reductions where or I shouldn't say today, 2016. Then here's with a few reductions. Here's where we are at in 2023. Here's where we can be at 2030. Here's where we need to be at net zero in 2050. And, with that, part of that is not just there are zero emissions. there's still emissions, but there's ways that we're also crediting those emissions to do. That's what the graph is. Can you talk a little bit about where those numbers come from, and what the projection is in terms of, is it all of these things that need to be done in order to get to that net zero, or is it the combination as you've talked about?
Yeah, so first of all, the numbers really come from two main studies. So every 5 years, right after StatsCan releases their updated statistics, then we take all of that information and we do a national life cycle assessment. And that is where we get the number of, it is this much to produce this much milk. So this is why we know that we're less than 1% of Canada's total, and that we're one of the best lowest greenhouse gas emitters in terms of milk production in the world. So then what we did was we worked with Veresco Solutions to say, okay, well, what if we map out, if we uptook a whole bunch more best management practices, the ones that we know exist today. I would also note that this isn't guessing as to what technology is going to be in the next 50 years. Where could we get to? And what we were able to see is that actually we could get there with what we have available today. And, I think that that's really exciting, but it gets me extra excited when I think about, well, what else is coming down, in the pipeline. And just today, Deborah from Lactanet was talking about the launch of their genetic indicator for methane. It's the first in the world to have a national indicator like this. It's just amazing. Canada's really at the forefront of sustainable agriculture, and I think we will continue to be. And another piece that actually isn't included in the number calculation as of right now is feed additives. And we know that they're not here right now, but they're coming and they have really significant improvements. So we know that we're probably not going to be able to get our emissions right down to zero. A cow's a cow. But we also know that lands that we manage sequester carbon, sort of different levels of sequestration sort of happen across Canada. But I would also say that carbon sequestration is a relatively new area of research, and we're getting a lot better at understanding it. I think we really understand what it is at its sort of peak, but then how we get it back up after it's been broken into agriculture land is something that I think there's lots more research to come in the coming years.
Well, there's no shortage of stuff to talk about here with the both of you, so we're going to take a quick break and then we'll get back into it talking about implementing best management practices on the farm.
As a chef, I like composting because it gives back to the earth. Hey Aaron, how do dairy farmers help protect the planet?
On my farm, I compost manure. This helps reduce the carbon footprint of milk production. Plus, manure makes for richer soil, which can help grow crops.
So it's like the circle of life.
Yeah, we're working towards a more sustainable future. I'm in. Are you?
I'm in.
That's Dairy Farming Forward. Dairy Farmers of Canada. Net zero by 2050.
All right, we're back with Fawn and JP. Now, JP, it was mentioned on the stage this afternoon when you were talking that you were part of the committee, the farmer, and you're going to have to help me with the name of it. Advisory group. Yep. Doing that, looking.
I never knew the real name.
but you were part of that. So
yeah.
So maybe you can kind of walk through a little bit in terms of, you've got kind of all these competing interests coming in. From your view, how has this evolved to a point where you think this is something that can be adopted and accepted by the vast majority of Canadian farmers?
So why did I care?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. To be honest, my skepticism. Like I thought, what are they going to do? What is going to happen? How bad is this going to be? Is this really going to benefit us? Like I was a real skeptic. Yeah, for sure.
Going to yell at someone.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't. That doesn't get you anywhere. But whatever. I was in there to express my thoughts. Yeah. Yeah. But that's why I cared.
Mm-hmm. But then obviously through that skepticism has apparently today turned into you're, as the DFC commercials say, you're in on a lot of this. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Ish?
It's fairish.
Fairish?
Ish.
Well, I
Maybe I can step in. You're in on the BMPs and realizing that efficiency is really tied to economics and environmental benefits that go along with it, and so that we really need to tie the two together.
yeah.
And just looking through it, like as you mentioned just before the break, like these are all things that already exist. Like what blows me away is how many other industries are making commitments saying the technology will be there in 30 years. We don't have to worry. Like we're in a position where, as you said, like we've got the practices, we've got the data. Now we have kind of the best management practices to prove it, where we could get there and then still do better with what happens in the next 25 years.
Yeah, I also would say, to add some realism to it, I suppose, or to not oversell it, this is a hard task. And I was talking with one of Canada's top researchers in the area, and he was speaking right after me at a conference, and I said, what are you going to tell them about the net zero goal and whether, it's possible for us to reach it or not? And he said, well, Fawn, you have set out to climb Mount Everest, and whether you make it to the top or whether you make it 3/4 of the way there, it is way better than sitting on the couch. And I was like, you don't know how big of an impact that just had on me, because, it really adds meaning to the work, right? We're all connected to the land. We're all connected to passing down our farms to next generations. And this is really tied to that. So, we're going to try our best. And, whether we make it to the top of Everest or whether we make it up 3/4 of the way there, I'm going to be really, really proud of what we've accomplished.
So I know you touched on a few of the BMPs earlier when you were talking about the categories, but there's over 30 in there. And I know Andrew and I, as we received the book this afternoon, quickly whip it open to the page that shows them all. And you can't tell me as a producer that you weren't sitting there scanning through being like, how hard is this going to be? And what's it going to mean to me and my farm? And it's true that just looking at that sheet, you can see, okay, yeah, I do that. I do some of this. I do some of that. Oh, that's something that I've thought about or might do. So can you speak to there's no one way to do this, and we constantly hear that in the dairy industry. But in terms of making this part of things work, what does it look like? How do you foresee farms taking this up farm to farm to farm?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I remember when I first started at DFC and back in July, we were calling this an implementation guide. And I was like, it sort of made me freeze, because I was like, I'm sorry, we're coming up with one guide for all of Canada, right? And I mean, that was never the intent. So we just sort of switched the name out and really made clear that these are options for different farmers to invest and investigate as to whether it's a good option for them, because every farm in Canada is so different. And so, we really recognize that, and we really recognize that we need to have different tools for different operations. So that's the key behind why there's so many options in there, and why, really upfront, I want to say some of these are not going to be good for you, right? It's not a good idea to put an anaerobic digester everywhere. And in some places it might work. So I think having that full information for people to make those decisions for themselves is really what we're trying to support.
Then just to kind of wrap up then, in terms of verification or validation or whatever you want to call it, we're at, ground zero right now. And as, Sarah's a farmer, me as a farmer, JP as a farmer, start implementing these, what types of things do we need to be doing? Are you following up with this? How will you know the progress as it's made on individual farms?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I feel when I'm visiting with folks that there's this really keen interest that people want to know, yeah, but what is my farm's greenhouse gas footprint? Tell me how I'm doing, Fawn, right? And so I was really excited that Lactanet has come up with their herd sustainability index, which I think can give you if you're working with Lactanet, can give you a key sort of where you stand in terms of sustainability. And that's going to be available nationally in April. It's in Quebec and the Maritimes right now. So I do encourage people to take a peek at that. And I understand that that number is going to be published 3 times a year. We are also looking at an individual farm calculator that people could, again, voluntarily utilize if they so chose. And we're trying to make it super easy for farmers to use. But I'm going to be really honest with you. These tools are not easy right now. They're not fun to use. I mean, maybe it's fun if you're a researcher and you have a whole bunch of time to really dig into this. But it's a lot of data input. It's a lot of understanding the numbers behind at this point. So, I'm pretty hesitant, I would say, to put that out there before it's a lot easier to use, because I really don't want farmers to go, well, to heck with this. This was such a pain in the butt. So I will just make one point, and then I'd love to hear JP's views on those 2 tools, is that we are really, really trying to keep the data side at the national level so that you as a farmer do not have to fill in, this processor wants this information, this retailer wants this information. We have national data that is super robust. It's in our life cycle assessment. It's cross-referenced with different data sources. We have our BMPs that help inform that, and so that's really where the data piece stays. And maybe somewhere down the road, we have more individual numbers, but I think we're quite a ways off from that. And I think it would take quite a bit to convince me that that's the direction that we need to go. But JP, I don't know if you've had a chance to either take a look at the herd sustainability index at Lactanet or any individual calculators, or whether that's something you want.
Yeah, we were asked to look at a few of the individual calculators in the advisory group, and the time required to do a proper job, I don't know many farms that would get you the right answer, like actually put in the effort to do the right thing and give the right answer. So, and that was a concern that was expressed, is data integrity. If people are going to do the paperwork, how much paperwork is it, and that whole burden. We're tired of paperwork as dairy farmers enough already. We got over it because we see what ProAction does for us and what it's doing for the industry, but we don't want more. That was a big hang-up.
Yeah, and a key point for us on the whole sustainability journey means not more paperwork.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about positive things, about how great this is going to be, and I do want to hear from you about what you think is going to be the easiest stuff for us to do, but I'm also curious about what you think the biggest challenge for dairy farmers is going into this. So maybe JP, we'll start with you.
I think one of the big challenges, and maybe the biggest one, is taking time as producers to look this over, to read through it. Not just brush it off, not just have it sit on your counter or sit in the trash can, if that's as far as you want to go with it, but to really sit down and grasp it. If you look at it and start flipping through, I think you'll quickly pick out some easy pickings, and then you can move on to some more challenging aspects of it. I can share as well, where our farm has a solar proposal on our desk right now to look at, and that was, again, before this came out, so kind of interesting that it does sort of line up, but we're looking at it. We're looking at practices that pay for themselves, practices that might not pay for themselves on your farm. They'll have a lot more resistance, I think, and I think those are ones that we ourselves have chosen not to look into more.
Yeah, for easy ones, my eyes right now are just going over the best management practices that have a high estimated return on investment, because I think those are the ones where we see, of course, our farmers be able to lean into, and a lot of those are in livestock management. They're things that we do, like optimizing animal health or enhancing herd genetics or improving feed efficiency. Of course, these are things that aren't just tied to greenhouse gas emissions, but are tied to having a good operation, right? So I think those are sort of easier ones to lean into, because there's already such an amazing knowledge base within the farmer community, right? So you're sort of building on that. I think also, we heard today one of the researchers from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Andrew, on our panel, talk about some of the manure options. And, some of them have sort of a lower return on investment, but I would say they have a really high greenhouse gas mitigation potential. So when we're looking at covering manure storage as an example, and he said, manure is really giving off emissions 3 months a year. To me, I'm like, well, let's just deal with this, right? Like put a lid on it over those 3 months and let's keep on going. Of course, it's more complex than that, and some of the plastic costs a fair chunk to do that, and there's logistical challenges with some of the straw. But I think that also speaks to there's probably some future research coming in that area that's going to be really exciting. So, I think those are the ones that I think are sort of easier to lean into. Some of the ones that I think are a little bit harder, I think there's grazing is put on the table, and we heard JP say, well, that's not really a great fit here, within Canada, and maybe in your two different parts of the world too, whether that's a fit. And so, I think there's some that'll have maybe a niche uptake, but others that are going to have really big uptake. And also, we spoke about anaerobic digesters, a fit for some folks and really not a fit for others. So everybody needs to consider what is good for their operation and how, their operation works.
So then we've got this guide, we've got all the information. As you mentioned, it's on the DFC website, it was emailed, like that's the places to find it?
Yes, find it on the DFC website. There is a sustainability hub there now, and we'll keep your eye on it too, because there's, as I said earlier, this is the start. There's more coming.
Awesome. Well, JP, Fawn, thanks so much for your work on this and for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you.
And that's it for this edition of the Canadian Podcast, recording live at the DFC Policy Conference in Ottawa.
Which was a fantastic day. Lots of great speakers. Great to have some conversations with lots of producers from across the country. Like, coming away from this meeting today, Sarah, what's kind of the big takeaway that you're taking home to the farm in BC?
Well, I think when I look at the guide specifically, we've finally seen this new Net Zero by 2050 beneficial management practice guide. And for me, just the conversations that started off, like you could see along our table even, that people were starting to say, oh yeah, I do that, I do this, looking at it and thinking about it that way. So I think the more we can be talking about these things just amongst ourselves and learning from others. We heard a lot about collaboration today, about connecting with mentors and peers and finding a way forward that way. I think all those things were really positive, and for me, that's something I'll take home and think more about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and certainly, like when you do flip through the guide, I'm actually very impressed with Fawn and her team. Everyone at DFC that worked on this, because it's actually, for how much information there is, it's really easy to digest, because here's the definition of what we're talking about. Here's the benefits of it. Here's whether it's a high return or a low return on investment. Here's the impact on emissions. Here's more resources. And with all of that just done nice and clean. So I think it is something that, from conversations I've had with producers that have been concerned or had some concerns, I think this lays out at least, probably doesn't ease all of them, but at least does, give some real meat and some real definition to what we're talking about.
And we didn't get into this with Fawn and JP that much, but I think that the fact, we're always talking about profitability ultimately at the end of the day, and the guide is respectful of that. It includes the ROI on all of these different MPs and classes it, and helps us to look at it that way too. So I think there is an economic benefit as well as environmental benefit. There's different ways to go about it, and it's not just oblivious to those facts.
Well, certainly, it was wonderful to meet you in person, Sarah. This has been a lot of fun to do these episodes live from Ottawa. And of course, thanks to our production team. We've got Bruce Sargent and Carl Belanger who have helped and here as well. Great to meet them. And of course, thanks to our sponsor, DFC.
And thank you, Andrew. Bruce has been incredibly patient with us in this live situation, so big thanks to him, and thanks to everyone for listening. Let's get back together soon and do another episode of the Canadian Podcast.